Chapter 26. As I have said earlier, our search for an appropriate place for Ma's summer retreat in the hills would commence as early as April, so that we could select a house and have it ready by June. However, as the years went on, it became increasingly difficult to find a suitable place. By now it was the mid 2000s. Choti Mataji had left us, her absence creating a big void in all our lives, enhancing my responsibilities to Ma. The world around us had changed considerably too. Most accommodations that were suggested to us these days turned out to lack a pure environment, were noisy and polluted. In view of this, it was decided to acquire a piece of land and build a cottage for Ma not too far from Kenchi temple. Long journeys were now becoming difficult for Ma. Besides this, it would be convenient for her to move out of the ashram for rest whenever needed. Traveling all over the nearby Kumaon hills, we found a beautiful spot of land in Soni Binsar close to Ranikhet, which is popularly called the Queen of Hills. As we arrived there, we heard the villagers chanting the Tulsi Ramayana in a rhythmic cadence. Adding to this auspicious beginning was the scenic beauty of the place and the cool mountain air. There was an old Shiva temple at the top of the hill, and beautiful pine trees dotting the slopes, a lush green hillside where natural springs spouted out streams of fresh water. There was nothing left to desire. We reached Kanchi late in the evening. I saw that Ma was busy with a large group of visitors who had come to the ashram seeking audience with her. It was only late at night when Ma retired to her kuti and that I was able to tell her about our day in Soni Binsar and that we found the right place. She asked me more than once, "Tu khush hai? Are you happy?" I said I was very happy. It had been a cloudy day, but the weather had been calm. Now, all of a sudden, there was torrential rain and high velocity wind with thunder and lightning. As I sat by Ma, the electricity went off. The temple's bells began to clang. The doors and windows crashed open and the splintering of glass panes could be heard. I quickly lit a candle. With me was little Gopal, a young boy who had been sent by his father to live in the ashram and who was deeply attached to Ma. At that moment, softly finding his way in the dark, Gopal, 9 years old then, walked in with a glass of milk for Ma. Gopal had accompanied me that day to Soni Binsar. Ma sat up on her takat. Taking the glass of milk in her hand, she asked Gopal if he had liked the place we had chosen for Ma's cottage. Gopal replied, "Ma, बहुत सुंदर जगह है. Ma, it's a very beautiful place." The storm was still raging. It was pitch dark. Ma then asked him, "गोपाल, बता अगर इस वक्त रात में तू दीदी और मैं वहां होते तो कैसा होता?" "Gopal, if you, Didi and I were there right now, how would you have felt?" Gopal replied promptly, "Ma, बहुत डर लगता. Ma, it would be frightening." Ma turned to me and said, "Forget this place. Make a cottage on the land given to you by your father in Nainital." This was the most unexpected turn of events after what had been for me an exhilarating day. The fatigue had barely worn out when my thoughts started to rush in another direction. Our ancestral house, Prasada Bhavan, is also on the same estate, and so care had been taken to ensure that Ma's residence would be exclusive to her. Now, the process of building Ma's retreat started in the right earnest with measurements, paperwork, clearances, and so on. I began to worry a little. It was already the month of April, and we had to get Ma's retreat ready for her by Guru Purnima in July. To top it all, the weather forecast for the year had predicted early onset of monsoons for northern India. The land had previously been a peach and apricot orchard. Many of the trees had died over the years, leaving an unkempt mountain slope with rubble and bushes, and needed a lot of work before we could start building. In Nainital, the rains normally start in the middle of June and go on till September, accompanied by blinding fog. Declaring this as an impossible time in which to build the cottage, architects came and went. There was much to make us sit with bent elbows, chins resting on our palms, sipping unnecessary cups of tea if we were to get caught up in these possibilities. However, We refused to be deterred. Kamlesh Bhandari ji took upon himself the onerous task of constructing Ma's cottage in a period of few months amidst adverse weather conditions. He came with a team of 93 men from Jaipur who started work simultaneously. The land was demarcated, cleared, and levelled. With Ma's consent, Akshay Tritiya, a very auspicious day in the Hindu almanac signifying unending prosperity, was chosen for the Bhumi Pujan. Ma was residing in the Bhumidar temple at the time. After much discussion and mustering up of courage, the group went up to Ma's kuti to request her to go to Nainital with us for the puja. They made an effort to assure her that it would be very simple and personal, with no outside interference whatsoever. As we have seen, Ma's way in Kechi, Vrindavan, and the other ashrams was that she would oversee the minutest of details before any formal puja took place. Once this was done, though, she would withdraw from the scene. Rarely was she ever seen in the temple premises during these ceremonies and rituals. When she was requested to come to Nainital, she smiled, hesitated as was her way, and then asked us to do the puja on her behalf. Since Ma was not going, the question of my going did not arise, and I too gave the same answer. Disappointment was writ large on every face. The Pandits had arrived, and Ma made sure that all the requisites for the Bhumi Puja had been procured well in time. She had asked for the prasad to be prepared a day before, as the auspicious hour for the puja was at 4 a.m. the next morning. Laddus were ordered, puri, aloo, halwa, and kheer were made in ample measures. Everyone was busy with the necessary preparations, but the joy was gone as Ma would not be there. That night, midnight onwards, there was once again a huge storm. Again the lights went off, the same banging of doors and crashing of panes in the high wind. Ma was awake for most part of the night. At 3 a.m., she sent a message that no one was to go to Nainital in this weather. The Pandits asked for the permission to go and do a short ritual at the propitious hour and return immediately. But Ma refused to relent, asking them to choose another favorable time during the day. All the plans were stalled temporarily, and after consulting the charts, Pandits declared 12 noon as the next best time. Early next morning, I got busy with my duties for Ma. Her bath, her tea, her puja, her simple bal bhog of wheat porridge and milk. Soon it was 11:30, and a message was sent to Ma that everyone would like to come to her for her blessings before leaving for Nainital. Ma came and sat in the outer room, and everyone was called. Everyone brought flowers, and I am sure Ma was taken by surprise when all held up the baskets and showered rose petals and jasmines upon her. Kasturi, kumkum, tilak was offered at Ma's feet, and I made her partake of a little sweet prasad. Soon it was time to go. Suddenly, Ma rose slowly from her chair and said in a childlike way, मैं भी चलती हूँ, नहीं तो तुम लोगों को कैंची लौटने से पहले मेरे लिए यहाँ आना पड़ेगा. Let me come with you. Otherwise, on your way back to Kenchi, you will all have to come to Bhumiadar for me. Then taking my hand, she said, Chal, hum bhi chalte hain. Come, let us also go. She went to the temple, and after offering pranam to Hanumanji and Maharajji, she got into the car. None of us could believe it. Reaching Nainital, Reaching Nainital, Ma walked through the construction site with such ease as though she was completely familiar with the landscapes and the happenings of the day. In accordance with the Vastu Shastra, 3 pits had been dug in the ground in 3 different directions. Each was about 6 feet deep, and steps leading down had been improvised from old wooden cartons. Though I tried to deter Ma from growing in the main pit, she paid no heed to my words, and taking the Pandit's hand, she descended to the bottom of the pit where the puja was going to be done. A chair was quickly found for her. The mason was ready with the trowel and mortar. Ma placed the first stone, which was a piece of cement flooring from Maharajji's kuti in Vrindavan. Then, taking the trowel from the mason, Ma spread cement over it. I had taken pages of Ram Nam written by Mummy, and this too was placed over the cement by Ma. Then the priests started the ritual worship, and Ma poured Ganga Jal and dust, water and flowers of 27 tirats. Ma had Maharajji's blanket brought down to her, and the arati was performed. Ma then bestowed upon the house the name Tirtham. The location of Tirtham is at 7,000 feet above sea level, and naturally it was very cold for the workers who had come from Rajasthan. Rainproof suits were provided to the men, and the work went on amidst rain and hail. Having had their first darshan of Ma, a few workers pledged to not return home till Mataji's bhavan was complete. Pages of Ram Nam from notebooks written by Mummy were plastered on the roofs and walls of what was going to be Ma's room, and Ganga water was mixed with cement and mortar. With the tireless efforts and loving dedication of Kamlesh Bhandariji, Tirtham was ready in July 2011, and the 11th was chosen as the day of Ma's homecoming, her Mangal Pravesh. Now, a week before Ma's arrival, the house was sanctified. 11 Pandits commenced the recitation of Srimad Bhagavat in the house. After this, the Ramayana was recited for 3 days, in which everyone participated. Offerings were made to Naina Devi, the presiding deity of Nainital, and to Gola Devata, the legendary god of Kumaon Hills. The 3 day Bhandara was planned, and the gates were open to all who came. Cooks were hired from Agra, Jaipur, and Shahjahanpur. Last, but perhaps not the least, artists were invited from Vrindavan for the performances of Sri Krishna Leela. On their arrival, the chief organizer wanted to know if our Guruji would be attending their show. As per Ma's wishes, we had not told them about her, and since Ma never attended any functions, we informed that the Ras Leela was only for the gathering. At this point, Ashokji, the chief of the artists, almost pleaded with us to organize a platform and put a chair at distance behind the audience. His words were, "I have faith that Guruji will come." The house was decorated with roses and marigolds. Amidst the Vedic chants, the blowing of conches, and the singing of joyous devotional songs in the shower of petals, Ma drove into Tirtham. The whole scene looked like a fond daughter's wedding. Maharajji's blanket came with Ma. After this was placed on the puja table, Ma entered the house. Arati was done. Everyone poured out all the love in their hearts. Some touched her feet, some held her hand, and others were overjoyed to hear her call them by their names. As the day, full of festivities, came towards its end, the Shamiana filled up with the audience and the Ras Leela began. After the famous peacock dance of the gopis, the characters portraying Sri Krishna appeared on the stage. Almost simultaneously, Ma rose from her chair in the room. I remembered then what I had heard from Ma in the past, that during Ras Leela the main performers manifest the divine forms of Lord Krishna and Sri Radha. Ma went off the house and stood behind the chair that had been placed for her, right at the back with folded hands. So engrossed was she in the divinity of Leela being enacted, I had to persuade her to sit down on the chair. Ma watched the performance for 2 hours, and in the end, Sri Radha and Sri Krishna danced their way to her and played Phulo Ki Holi with Ma. With this auspicious beginning, Tirtham became a spiritual home for Ma. In a simple way, the routine of ashram was maintained in the house. The morning prayers, Bhog Prasad thrice a day, followed by Arati, and the evening prayers, which were particularly beautiful. Ma sat in her chair in her room as we did Prarthana, sitting around her on the carpet. After this, it was time for the dinner prasad. At Tirtham, perhaps the greatest privilege that came to me was cooking all of Ma's meals. To be honest, cooking had been an uphill task for me, but gradually I'd learned to make Kumaoni food just the way Ma had eaten in her childhood. Just as Choti Mataji had in her last few years, Ma too would ask me to feed her with my hands. For me, the best appreciation from Ma would be when taking prasad, she would look at me and say, "आज तूने ईजा के हाथ के प्रसाद की याद दिला दी. Today you reminded me of food cooked by my mother." A day in Tirtham, Ma spent most of her time sitting in the garden, writing Ram Nam in the sun. Sometimes she asked me to read to her. The lilies and the hydrangeas would be in full bloom. The birds would splash around in bird bath, and langurs would swing from tree to tree. When Ma looked it up, She would see the familiar mountain peaks of Nainital all around. Snow View, China Peak, the hill of Lariakatta, Camel's Back. She reminisced as she pointed out these to me, how in the past she used to walk in these woods for hours. As Ma sat in the garden in her beautiful silence, it gave me greatest happiness to observe her from distance, looking so happy, so at home. Once in a while, on a clear day, a few of us would organize a small cookout in the garden when all of us would participate in making the prasad. As Ma looked at us now and again, writing Ram Ram at her table and chair, which was placed under a shady tree. Receiving prasad from her hands, we would become children again. Decades ago, I had left home for Ma. Now, Ma had come home with me to Tirtham.